The myth of humanity. The stars stretched endlessly across the dark void of space, a vast, uncharted sea where countless civilizations had risen and fallen. Some were peaceful, others warlike, but none had ever come close to matching the legends whispered throughout the galaxy, legends of a race called humanity. The Council, a powerful assembly of the most advanced civilizations, ruled over this galactic expanse with supreme confidence. Their fleets were unmatched, their technology superior, and their control over the stars absolute. For centuries, they had crushed all who stood in their way, taking great pride in their dominance. But one story had always seemed too far-fetched, too unbelievable. The tale of humanity, a species so fierce, so relentless, that entire fleets had been wiped out without mercy. They were called the Mythic Ones, beings who lived in the forgotten corners of space, waiting for the day when their return would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The Council had long dismissed these stories. After all, if such a race had ever existed, they would have left some trace, some sign of their presence. But no evidence had ever been found. The Council had conducted countless expeditions to the far reaches of the galaxy, searching for remnants of humanity, but all they found were empty worlds, silent and lifeless. Time passed, and the idea of humanity as a real threat faded into the realm of myth. The most powerful minds in the galaxy laughed at the idea of a race capable of challenging the mighty Council. It was easier to believe that humanity was just a fantasy, a cautionary tale meant to keep lesser races in line. But in the darkest corners of space, there were still whispers. Some believed the humans were waiting, biding their time, ready to strike when the galaxy least expected it. Others thought they had been wiped out long ago by the overwhelming power of the Council. But for most, the myth was nothing more than a bedtime story. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. It began with a strange signal, a ripple in the vast silence of space. It was faint at first, barely a blip on the radar. But as the signal grew stronger, it caught the attention of the Council's top officials. They studied it carefully, dismissing it as nothing more than a random anomaly. The technology they used to monitor the galaxy was unmatched. There was no way that anything could slip past their defenses without them knowing. They had nothing to fear. At least, that's what they thought. The signal, growing louder and more distinct, was soon identified as coming from deep in the unknown regions of space. The coordinates were traced back to a distant sector, far beyond the Council's established borders. There was no reason for anyone to be out there. Nothing had been recorded in that part of the galaxy for hundreds of years. Yet, the signal continued to grow stronger, more focused. It was clear now that it wasn't some random glitch or interference. Someone, or something, was deliberately sending it. The Council's leaders, gathered in the Grand Meeting Hall, listened intently to the transmission. They were puzzled. Was this a message from another unknown race? Perhaps a small group of survivors from an old, forgotten civilization, or perhaps a trick, an attempt to gain attention from one of the many lesser species that surrounded them. The most prominent members of the Council scoffed. There was no way a threat could come from such an obscure region of space. Yet they agreed to investigate. After all, it could be an opportunity to demonstrate their strength, to remind the galaxy who ruled. The decision was made. A fleet would be dispatched to explore the source of the signal. The best officers and commanders from the Council's military would be sent to investigate, ready to crush whatever they found. After all, what harm could a myth cause? As the fleet left the safety of Council space, the leaders sat back in their seats, confident that their actions would be swift and decisive. The myth of humanity, they thought, was about to be erased once and for all. They would go to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, find whatever was sending the signal, and eliminate it. It would be just another victory in the Council's long history. Meanwhile, out in the vast emptiness of space, the humans had been watching. They knew what the Council had planned. They had known for years that this day would come, the day when the galaxy would finally realize they were not just a myth. The humans had waited for centuries, their ships long dormant, hidden in the dark corners of the universe. The legends of their strength and power had spread across the galaxy, growing more fantastical with each telling. And now, those legends were about to become reality. In the heart of humanity's fleet, hidden in the depths of space, the first ship began to stir. Its engines hummed to life, a low, powerful sound that echoed across the cold expanse. It was ancient, its design nearly forgotten, but it was still alive, still capable of striking fear into the hearts of anyone who dared to challenge it. As the signal reached the Council's fleet, the human ships began to emerge from the depths of space, one by one. No grand fleet, no overwhelming armada. Just a handful of ships, each one a monument to humanity's forgotten power. Their sleek, intimidating designs sent a chill down the spine of those who saw them for the first time. The Council's fleet continued its approach, unaware of the danger that was closing in on them. They would soon learn that humanity was not a myth. They would soon realize that they had made a terrible mistake, and that the legends were not stories, they were warnings. And as the first of the human ships dropped out of warp and appeared before the Council's fleet, the galaxy would never be the same again. The myth was about to become reality. The Council's fleet glided through the cold void, unaware of the growing threat lurking in the shadows of deep space. Their ships, massive and powerful, cut through the blackness with calculated precision, their destination fixed. The source of the mysterious signal. The fleet's leaders were calm, confident in their superiority. Nothing could surprise them now. They had been rulers of the galaxy for centuries, their power unmatched by any other race. The myths of humanity had long been forgotten. But as they ventured deeper into the unknown, a strange feeling began to spread among the officers aboard the ships. There was something unsettling about this mission, something that felt wrong. The closer they got to the coordinates, the more tense the air became. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. As they approached the designated area, the signal grew even stronger. It was no longer a faint whisper in the void. It was a roar, a clear, undeniable call reaching out to them. The sound of it reverberated through the very fabric of space. The officers, who had previously dismissed the signal as nothing more than a curious anomaly, now found themselves on edge. There was a presence here, an intelligence, sending the signal with purpose. "Captain, we're almost there," a young officer reported, his voice a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. His eyes were glued to the glowing screens in front of him, watching as their ship slowly approached the heart of the signal. The captain of the fleet, a seasoned veteran named Duran, glanced over at the officer. His weathered face was a mask of calm, but his sharp eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. For the first time in many years, he felt unease. "Keep your focus," Captain Duran ordered. "We've faced countless challenges before. This is just another routine operation. But remain vigilant. We don't know what's waiting for us." The officer nodded, but the tension was palpable. The crew could feel it in the air, a quiet hum that grew louder as they neared their destination. The vast expanse of empty space seemed to close in on them, and the stars themselves appeared to fade into the distance. The source of the signal was somewhere ahead, hidden behind an asteroid field that had been left undisturbed for centuries. "Sir, we've detected something," another officer reported from the sensor station. "There's a ship, small, but it's massive in terms of power. It's moving." The captain's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since the mission began, he was unsure of what to make of the situation. A single ship? How could that be possible? "Can you identify it?" Captain Duran asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "No, Captain. We've never seen anything like it, but there's no mistake. It's alive. It's out there." The officer's words were filled with awe and trepidation. The Council's fleet had encountered many species, many ships, and many weapons, but nothing had ever caused this kind of uncertainty. A single ship, hiding in the deepest reaches of space, sending a signal strong enough to reach all the way across the galaxy. It didn't make sense. Everything they knew told them it couldn't be true. But reality had a way of defying expectations. "Prepare for combat," Captain Duran ordered, trying to regain control of the situation. "Whatever it is, we will neutralize it. Steady, everyone. We're about to engage." The ships in the fleet began to shift formation, their enormous guns rotating into position. The tension among the crew members rose, and their hands hovered nervously over the control panels. They had been trained for situations like this, but this felt different. The silence of space had never seemed so oppressive. The unknown lay before them, and they had no idea what they were about to face. As they advanced, they saw the first signs of the mysterious ship. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It didn't match any known design or structure. It was old, far older than any of the Council's ships, but its power was undeniable. It was enormous, stretching far beyond the size of the typical battleships that the Council used. But what was most shocking was its appearance. It had the unmistakable feel of something ancient, something that had been left behind, forgotten by time itself. The human ship, drifting just beyond the asteroid field, was a marvel of forgotten engineering. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the stars in strange ways. Some of its parts looked worn and ancient, while others glowed with a powerful, vibrant energy. The ship was a relic, yet alive with a strange, almost eerie energy. "Is that a weapon?" another officer asked, his voice trembling. He was staring at the ship's hull, which appeared to pulse with light as though it were breathing. "It looks like it could destroy us all in an instant." Captain Duran didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humanity was just a myth, wasn't it? They couldn't possibly have the technology to create something like this. Could they? The human ship's engines flared to life, and it began to move slowly towards the Council's fleet. It didn't accelerate in the way that Council ships did, but its movements were deliberate and controlled. It wasn't retreating, nor was it attempting to flee. It was coming toward them, and the feeling of inevitability washed over the officers. "Ready all weapons," Captain Durand ordered again, his voice more stern now. "If it attacks, we fight back. But be cautious. We don't know what we're dealing with." The human ship continued to close the distance, its enormous frame becoming clearer with each passing second. The officers aboard the Council's fleet had been trained for many scenarios, but this was something beyond their experience. The legends of humanity were real, and now they were facing the very myth that had haunted the galaxy for centuries. In that moment, as the gap between the fleets closed, Captain Duran realized something. He had no idea what kind of battle lay ahead, but one thing was clear: this was not going to be a typical encounter. Humanity had arrived, and they had brought something the galaxy had never seen before. The question was no longer if the Council could defeat them. The question was whether the Council had the strength to survive. And as the first shots from the human ship fired across the distance, the answer would begin to reveal itself. The Council fleet's commanders were still reeling from the first signs of the human ship. The unthinkable had happened. Humanity was real, and its ship had appeared from nowhere, challenging the might of their empire. The first shots fired from the human ship had missed, but that only added to the unease. There was something deliberate about the way the human ship moved, something planned. And yet, for all the advanced technology aboard the Council's vessels, they could not predict what would come next. Captain Duran's mind was in overdrive. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. His fleet, over a dozen mighty ships capable of annihilating whole worlds, was up against one ship, a ship from a race that was supposed to be a myth. How was it possible? What did humanity have that made them so dangerous? The sensors on the Council ships flickered, and for a moment, they lost track of the human ship's position. The fleet had been moving forward, expecting an easy target. Now, the very thing they had assumed was a myth had become a tangible, real, and terrifying threat. Captain Duran's brow furrowed in frustration. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. "Captain, we've lost all contact with the ship." The communications officer reported in a panicked voice. "It's gone off our scanners. I don't know where it is." Duran stood up sharply, his fists clenched at his sides. It was one thing to face an unknown enemy. It was another thing entirely to lose track of them in space. Where had the human ship gone? It couldn't just disappear like that. The fleet had been moving slowly, carefully. Nothing should have been able to evade their sensors. But humanity's ship was gone. He stared out of the massive viewing window at the vastness of space. The stars seemed endless, and for a brief moment, a chill ran down his spine. He had spent his entire career leading the most advanced military in the galaxy, but now he was facing something he couldn't explain. The myths had always seemed so distant, so impossible. But now, the very legend that had been whispered about for centuries was standing in front of him. Then suddenly, the warning alarms blared. "Incoming." A voice shouted across the comms, sharp and urgent. Captain Duran snapped to attention. His mind raced, but his instincts were sharper. The human ship had reappeared, and it was no longer moving like before. It had accelerated at an impossible speed, closing in on the fleet in seconds. Its massive form was like a shadow, growing larger and more menacing by the moment. The fleet's weapon systems powered up, but Captain Duran hesitated. The sheer size and power of the human ship was overwhelming. This wasn't just a battle. It felt like something far more dangerous. He could feel his hands tighten on the armrests of his command chair. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a challenge to everything the Council believed in. How could a single human ship be this powerful? "Fire!" Captain Duran shouted, his voice full of determination. "Bring it down." The fleet responded quickly. A barrage of laser fire erupted from the Council ships, a deadly rain of energy that lit up the darkness of space. The shots tore through the void, aimed directly at the human ship. But then something incredible happened. The human ship did not retaliate with the kind of fury they expected. Instead, it moved in a way that defied all logic. It dodged, not just quickly, but in an almost fluid, graceful manner, as if it were dancing through the blasts. The fleet's weapons fire passed harmlessly by, missing the target completely. The human ship was weaving, slipping through the attacks with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for its size. Captain Duran's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen anything like it. This wasn't just a ship. It was a living force, responding to the attacks with an uncanny intelligence. It was as if the human ship had anticipated every move the fleet made, every shot they fired. And with each failed strike, Duran's crew grew more and more uncertain. "Damn it," Duran cursed under his breath. "What kind of ship is this?" Then, as if answering his question, the human ship launched a series of small, glowing projectiles. They were unlike any weapon the Council had seen before. At first, they appeared to be nothing more than missiles, but as they neared the fleet, they suddenly exploded into an array of blinding light. The blast wasn't destructive. Instead, it seemed to be a shockwave of pure energy, disrupting the fleet's systems. Lights flickered, consoles buzzed, and crew members scrambled to regain control. But it was no use. The fleet was suddenly blind. They could no longer track the human ship. Their weapons systems malfunctioned, and the once unshakable coordination of the fleet was thrown into chaos. Duran's eyes widened in shock. How had they done this? The human ship wasn't just advanced. It was playing with them. It was a show of power. And the fleet had no answers. The Council ships were still firing blindly into the darkness, and their attacks were missing by miles. "Captain," an officer gasped, his voice trembling with fear. It's coming closer. They're not firing. They're just watching us." Duran swallowed hard. There was something terrifying about the human ship's calm. It was like it didn't need to fight. It knew it had already won. The human ship stopped its evasive maneuvers and now hovered just outside the fleet, its massive frame towering over them. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And in the eerie silence that followed, Captain Duran realized something profound. The myths were true. Humanity had returned, and their return would change everything. "Get ready," Duran said, his voice steely and cold. "We need to take it down now. Fire at will." The fleet fired again, but there was a nagging feeling in the pit of Duran's stomach. Something told him this wasn't going to be as simple as any battle he'd fought before. The legends were true. Humanity had returned, and it was more powerful than they had ever imagined. The real fight was just beginning. Captain Duran's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white, as he watched the holographic display of the battlefield. The human ship was still there, hanging motionless just outside the fleet, its massive hull gleaming in the cold light of distant stars. The eerie silence in the cockpit was suffocating. Every crew member was frozen, waiting for the inevitable. Duran's mind raced, but his focus remained sharp. They had tried everything: missiles, laser fire, and energy pulses, but nothing had worked. The human ship was unlike anything the Council had ever encountered. Its ability to dodge, its superior technology. And now, the way it had disabled their weapons systems with a single, well-placed strike. These were not the actions of a mere myth. This was something real, something terrifying. "Captain, we're losing power to the auxiliary systems," the engineering officer called out, panic creeping into his voice. Duran turned sharply. "What do you mean, losing power?" "The human ship," the officer continued, "its weapon. We think it has scrambled our systems. We can't fix it. At this rate, the whole fleet could lose contact with each other." Duran felt a chill run down his spine. He had feared this very moment, when it became clear that the Council's technology, superior as it was, might not be enough against this unexpected enemy. The human ship wasn't just more advanced, it was far more intelligent. It was as if they knew exactly how to exploit every weakness in their fleet. And with every passing second, the Council fleet was slipping further into disarray. "Get those systems back online, or we're done for," Duran barked, his voice rising. But it was already too late. The human ship moved again. It glided forward slowly, like a predator closing in on its prey. There was no aggression in its movement, no warning. It simply moved, and the fleet was forced to watch. The first officer's voice cracked through the tense silence. "Captain, we've lost our lock on the human ship. It's too fast, too unpredictable. We can't target it." Duran's mind raced. He was running out of time, and the fleet was becoming more vulnerable by the second. The human ship had taken control of the battlefield without firing a single shot. It had shown its power not in destruction, but in control, in manipulation. They didn't need to fight. They were forcing the Council to break apart on their own. Suddenly, a new signal appeared on Duran's command console. A massive beam of light shot from the human ship, its intensity blinding. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a devastating pulse of energy that struck one of the lead ships dead on. The ship shuddered violently as the beam made contact. The shields around it flickered, but they could not withstand the blast. The ship's hull cracked, splitting open like a shell, and the explosion that followed was enough to rattle the entire fleet. "Direct hit," an officer screamed, his voice filled with horror. "The flagship is down. The flagship is down." Duran's heart sank. The Council flagship was the largest, most powerful ship in the fleet. It was the symbol of the Council's might. If it was destroyed, the entire fleet would fall into chaos. "Signal the fleet to retreat," Duran ordered, his voice low and steady, despite the storm of emotions raging within him. "We can't win this fight. Get us out of here." But it was too late. The human ship, without hesitation, fired again. This time, it wasn't a single pulse. It was a barrage, a steady stream of energy that tore through the darkness. Ships that had once been symbols of military supremacy were now little more than toys in the hands of the human ship. "Retreat. Retreat." Duran's orders rang out in vain as the human ship continued its onslaught, moving with such precision and speed that the Council fleet could not even mount a counterattack. The few remaining ships tried to flee, but they were too slow, too disoriented. One by one, the Council ships were reduced to rubble. Their once mighty weapons were useless, their shields faltered, and their commanders, captains who had once been celebrated throughout the galaxy, watched in stunned silence as humanity's ship ripped through them, tearing apart the fleet with ease. Duran stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the screen. His mind refused to accept what was happening. How had this one ship, with its unknown technology and unknown crew, been able to destroy everything they had worked for? How had humanity become so powerful? In that moment, as the last few ships of the fleet fell, Duran understood. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about sending a message. Humanity wasn't a myth. It wasn't a weak, primitive species. They had returned, stronger than ever. And they were here to stay. Duran didn't know how long he had been standing there when the comms crackled to life. A voice, calm and cold, echoed through the bridge. "This is humanity," the voice said. "Your invasion is over. Leave our galaxy, and you may live. Stay, and you will suffer the consequences." The transmission cut off, leaving nothing but the eerie hum of the bridge. Duran felt his knees weaken as he sank into his chair. The myth of humanity was no longer a myth. The legends had come to life. The battle was over, and humanity had won. The silence that followed the destruction of the Council fleet was deafening. Captain Duran sat in his command chair, staring at the remains of the once mighty armada. His fingers trembled slightly, but he quickly clenched his fists to steady himself. The enormity of the loss was just beginning to sink in. This wasn't a defeat, it was a catastrophe, a humiliation. Around him, his officers and crew were still in shock, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. The view screens flickered with images of twisted metal and scattered wreckage, a grim testament to their failure. The human ship, alone and untouched, hovered in the distance. It was the only thing that remained untouched in this chaotic scene, and it loomed like a dark omen over the battlefield. "Captain, what now?" one of his officers asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a weight, but Duran didn't have an answer. There was no plan anymore, no strategy. The Council had failed to prepare for humanity's might, and now they were paying the price. "We retreat," Duran said, his voice low but steady. "There's nothing left to fight for." The order to retreat was given, but it felt hollow. The fleet, what was left of it, slowly began to turn away, limping back toward the safety of the inner systems. Duran knew that no matter how fast they ran, they would never outrun the shame. The damage was done. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and there was no going back. But as the fleet began to retreat, another signal interrupted their communication. It wasn't the usual communication codes. This was something different. A transmission from the human ship. The same cold, emotionless voice that had spoken earlier now echoed across the bridge. "This is humanity's message to the galaxy," the voice said. "Your arrogance has cost you. We will not tolerate any further attempts to invade. We give you one chance to leave, or we will come for you, and you will not be spared." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving nothing but the hum of the ship's engines and the distant echoes of destruction. Duran's stomach twisted in knots. He had never heard such a clear and direct threat. This wasn't just a declaration of power, it was a warning. A warning that they would come after anyone who dared challenge them again. And Duran knew deep down that humanity was capable of following through. "Captain, what do we do now?" another officer asked, his voice trembling. Duran rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of their situation crushing him. He had never been more uncertain of what to do. The Council, the great power that had ruled the galaxy for so long, had just been humbled by a single human ship. How could they possibly regroup after this? How could they face the rest of the galaxy, knowing that humanity was now more powerful than any of them could have ever imagined? "I don't know," Duran replied, his voice hollow. "But we have to survive. The Council won't be able to stop them, but maybe we can find a way to communicate. Maybe we can reason with them. But even as he said it, Duran knew how unlikely that seemed. Humanity wasn't interested in negotiations. They weren't the weak, disorganized species the galaxy had assumed. They had been underestimated, and now the consequences of that mistake were impossible to ignore. As the fleet limped back to the core systems, Duran couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that humanity was still out there, watching them, waiting for the next move. He had seen what they could do, what their technology was capable of. It wasn't just their power that terrified him. It was the cold, unyielding certainty that they would not hesitate to wipe out anyone who threatened their peace. As the days passed, rumors began to spread through the fleet. There were whispers of more human ships being spotted in different sectors. They were coming. The legends of humanity's might, once dismissed as mere stories, were now confirmed as truth. The galaxy would never be the same. Captain Duran stared out into the void of space, deep in thought. The Council had underestimated humanity once, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Humanity was not just a force to be reckoned with. They were a new power, and the galaxy had just entered a new age, one that would never be the same again. The next few weeks were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Captain Duran could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him more each day. The Council had regrouped, but the mood was one of quiet panic. They were no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. Humanity had shown them the raw power they had at their disposal, and no one was sure how to respond. The idea that one ship could obliterate an entire fleet was a nightmare that lingered in every officer's mind. In the Council's headquarters, leaders from all the major species convened in secret. They discussed a variety of options: retreat, diplomacy, fortifying their defenses, but no one had any answers. Every path seemed to lead to one inevitable conclusion. Humanity was too powerful, too unpredictable. We cannot face them head-on. One of the leaders, a towering alien with sleek, silver skin, said, his voice grave. We've seen what they can do, and we are no match for it. Another leader, a member of a race known for their cunning and trickery, shook his head. We don't know enough about them. We must send scouts, gather more intelligence. Perhaps we can find a way to outsmart them. But the quiet, looming truth was hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The galaxy, as they knew it, was over. The balance of power had shifted. The Council could no longer afford to act as they had before. The legends of humanity, once dismissed as mere myths and fairy tales, were now undeniable facts. The galaxy had to change. The fear of what would come next was inescapable. In a dark corner of the Council chamber, Captain Duran stood by the observation window, looking out into the stars. He had received no orders from the higher-ups for days, and he had a bad feeling. The vastness of space stretched out before him, a silent witness to the unknowns they faced. Humanity's fleet was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. What would they do next? Would they come for them again? Or would they bide their time and watch the galaxy fall into disarray? Duran had heard rumors, whispers from the few survivors of the previous battle, of strange, mysterious ships seen in the distance. Ships unlike any the galaxy had ever encountered before. They said that the humans weren't just using advanced weaponry, but something more, something beyond anything their best scientists could understand. The fear of the unknown gnawed at him. He knew his fleet had been severely crippled, but what if humanity wasn't finished? What if the true extent of their power was yet to be revealed? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp tone from his communication terminal. A message had come in from one of the farthest colonies. He answered it quickly, knowing it had to be important. Captain Duran. The voice on the screen crackled. It was the commander of the colony on the outer rim. We've just detected a fleet. It's them. The humans. Their ships, they're heading straight for us. We're unprepared. We don't have the resources to defend against them. Duran's heart sank. How many ships are we talking about? The commander hesitated. More than we've ever seen. But what's strange? They're not in formation. It's as if they don't care about strategy. They're just coming. Duran's hand tightened on the edge of the terminal. The humans had never been conventional. But this was something new. They weren't just marching into battle. They were asserting their presence, showing the galaxy that they could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. What are they doing now? Duran asked, his voice low. They're sending us a message, the commander said. It's a warning. They want us to know that they're watching, that they're always watching. Duran's mind raced. This wasn't just about a single encounter anymore. Humanity was making it clear they were the ones in control. He knew that if the humans wanted to, they could wipe out the Council's colonies one by one, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. Tell the colony to prepare for evacuation, Duran ordered, his voice firm despite the panic rising within him. We won't take any chances. But as he ended the transmission, the weight of his words began to sink in. Evacuation. What did that even mean in a galaxy where humanity now held the upper hand? There would be no more safe havens, no more neutral ground. Humanity wasn't just a species. They were now the galaxy's rulers, and everyone else was at their mercy. The Council was scrambling to regroup, but it was clear that they were too late. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were facing the consequences of their arrogance. And as the reports continued to flood in, of human ships appearing in other sectors, of their dominance spreading like wildfire, Duran realized the full extent of what was happening. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse, but it was not the humans who had caused it. No, it was the Council's hubris, their belief that they could keep control forever. And now, the humans were here to rewrite the rules. The once proud and unshakable Council had begun to crumble under the weight of its own mistakes. The galaxy, which had long been ruled by political maneuvering and fragile alliances, was now at the mercy of a force that no one had anticipated: humanity. Captain Duran stood once more at the command station of his flagship, the harsh reality of their situation settling like an iron weight on his chest. His officers had all but given up hope of any meaningful retaliation, and the growing reports of humanity's fleet advancing on all fronts only seemed to confirm that the end of their dominance was inevitable. Captain, the voice of his chief engineer broke the silence. The fleet is almost out of fuel. We're not going to make it to the inner core at this rate. We'll be sitting ducks for humanity. Duran closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. They were cornered. The choice was clear: fight a battle they could not win, or surrender to humanity's overwhelming power. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, there was something stirring within him, a faint flicker of defiance. We won't run, Duran said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. Tell the fleet to make preparations. We'll hold the line as long as we can. His officers exchanged nervous glances, but no one questioned him. The Council had failed them, but Duran was still their captain, and for some, that was enough. They were out of options, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was one final chance to show humanity that they weren't as helpless as they seemed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, humanity's fleet had already begun to arrive in full force. The legends of their power had been more than true. It wasn't just the advanced weaponry or the cutting-edge ships. It was the sheer determination and will of the humans. They had fought, bled, and struggled to get where they were, and now they weren't going to let anyone stand in their way. Commander Riley stood aboard the flagship, watching as the fleet gathered. Her face was hardened, her eyes filled with the weight of the responsibility that rested on her shoulders. She knew what this moment meant. It wasn't just about the battle. It was about the future of the galaxy. It was about humanity's place in it. We've come a long way, Riley muttered to herself, her hand resting on the bridge's control panel. But this isn't over. We have to make them understand that we are not a species to be underestimated. The orders were given, and the massive fleet began to move into position, descending into the heart of Council space like an unstoppable wave. No one could deny the power they had on their side. The galaxy, for the first time in a long while, was watching in silent anticipation. The legends of humanity were no longer stories. They were real, and they were coming to take what was theirs. As humanity's ships closed in on the Council fleet, the tension was palpable. Duran's ship was among the few still holding strong, positioned in the heart of the last remaining stronghold of resistance. For all their bravado, the truth was clear to Duran. Their chances of survival were slim. Yet, despite the odds, there was something deep inside him that refused to yield. The galaxy might see them as just another empire fallen to the wayside, but they would never let humanity erase their history so easily. They would fight to the very end. Moments later, the first strike came. A blast of energy so intense that it lit up the darkened expanse of space erupted from one of humanity's ships, slamming into Duran's flagship with the force of 1,000 storms. The ship groaned, shuddering under the assault, but it remained intact. For now, the shields flickered as they absorbed the impact, but it was clear to everyone that they couldn't take many more hits like that. Still, Duran's resolve only strengthened. He had come this far. If this was where it all ended, then so be it. But even as the battle raged on, something unexpected occurred. Humanity's ships didn't move to finish them off immediately. They lingered, as if waiting, watching. Through the static-filled communication channel, a message came through. Humanity's voice, calm but filled with purpose. "This is your final chance." Commander Riley's voice rang out. "The galaxy has witnessed your weakness, your arrogance. Surrender now, and we may allow you to live. Resist, and we will show you what true power looks like." Duran stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. What could they possibly offer? A life of submission to a new, unstoppable force. Was that the only way forward? "We will not surrender," Duran replied, his voice steady, but filled with the last remnants of defiance. "We are not like you." "Then prepare for the end," Riley said, the cold finality in her voice unmistakable. The battle intensified as humanity's ships closed in. Duran and his crew fought with every ounce of strength they had left, but the outcome was never in doubt. The writing was on the wall. The galaxy was changing, and there was no place for those who could not evolve with it. As the final blow landed, sending Duran's flagship into the depths of space, a sense of inevitability washed over the battlefield. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity emerged from myth to reality. The legends were true. The power of humanity had been unleashed, and there was no going back. With the Council's fleet scattered and the remnants of resistance crumbling, humanity's future as the new rulers of the galaxy was all but assured. And so, as the stars watched silently from their distant perches, the galaxy entered a new era, one in which humanity stood at the top. The legends of old had been proved true, and the myths had become history. And now, the future of the galaxy would be written by the hand of humanity.